Here are Stone Phillips and Jane Pauley.
Good evening. It's hard to imagine, but try. It's wartime. An invading army sweeps into your town and carries away the young girls, teenagers, and young mothers. Women who are kept in crude houses for one purpose, to have sex with soldiers, up to 40 times a day.
It's the kind of story we've heard most recently coming out of the prison camps of Bosnia. But never was it done more systematically on so large a scale as it was 50 years ago when the Japanese army swept through Southeast Asia, its soldiers forcing an estimated 200,000 women into slavery, sexual slavery. And as Dennis Murphy reports, when the war ended and the women demanded some kind of justice, the Japanese simply denied it ever happened.
Sometimes it's the pain in Gertrude's leg that brings the memory screaming back. Almost 50 years later, she endures the nightmare that the Japanese soldiers are still in her bed.
All that the Japanese officers did to me were unthinkable. I think they just did it out of cruelty. They just did it like beasts and savages.
Gertrude Balisa as a young girl, had dreams of becoming a wife and mother, even a respected Philippine attorney. But in the slums of Manila today, she's known, if at all, as a Japanese comfort woman. All because of what happened in this place during the Japanese occupation of the Philippines in World War II. How does it feel to be back, Gertrude?
Does not feel very much. Very good.
Today, for the first time in over 40 years, Gertrude is back in Naga City, the place where she lived so long ago with her husband, a civil engineer, and their 2 little girls. Gertrude grew up in one of the area's wealthier families. A star pupil, she had dreams of being a judge. Her old house is gone now, but it was somewhere near this market that the Japanese military truck pulled up, and her life changed utterly.
I saw 2 soldiers and 1 officer coming up my house. And when they were already up, the soldiers just told me to go with them.
Did they say why you were to go with them?
No. They just told me to go with them. And they had their bayonets pointed at me.
We retrace the journey she made as a frightened prisoner of the Japanese, through a Filipino landscape of rice paddies and volcanoes. And here, at what was then a Japanese barracks, she was thrown together with 5 other terrified women and girls. All had been abducted. They were transferred to a remote outpost up in the hills. The commander singled out Gertrude. Her husband had been a resistance fighter.
He told me particularly that I would stay in his quarters and serve him, provide him with sexual comfort.
He told you you were going to be his slave, his sexual slave.
Yes. I would provide him sexual comfort at his bidding, when and where and how he wanted me.
The commander shared Gertrude with other officers who beat and kicked her.
Every single moment I spent in that hell is still vivid to me. Oh, I cannot think of it without crying. And I spent 1 year and 2 months in that hell of a room.
Gertrude was only one of as many as 200,000 women across Asia who were coerced and abducted into forced prostitution by the Japanese Imperial Army. Comfort woman, a delicate name that really meant sex slave. The Japanese Army built a network of military brothels that eventually reached from Korea to Okinawa, from Burma to Indonesia. Like Gertrude, the survivors lived for decades in silence and disgrace, their story virtually unknown in the West.
I was ashamed. I was afraid of what people would think of me if they knew. I was afraid they wouldn't see me as a human being.
Chong Sung-myung, Korean, abducted from her village, shipped to a brothel at the age of 15.
I can't go home because I was comfort woman, so I was desperate. I don't know what to do, so I decided to commit suicide.
Sung Sin-do, Korean, captive 7 years in Japanese military brothels. A Japanese name was tattooed on her arm. Rosa Henson, Filipina, beaten, raped by up to 12 soldiers a day. Juanita Hamill, Filipina. She lost her baby after the Japanese raped her repeatedly. And Ellie Vanderploeg, Dutch, one of the few Western women imprisoned in a Japanese brothel.
I can't forget. Not now, not never.
Japanese soldiers actually bought tickets and lined up waiting their turn with scared teenagers from Korea, China, Burma. The military brass came up with the concept of organized brothels as a way of controlling its soldiers. War and lust had led to carnage in Nanking, China. There, within a span of 30 days in 1937, Japanese forces killed as many as 200,000 men and women. The Japanese soldiers were denounced as barbarians and rapists.
They were accused of a great number of rapes. So that wasn't good for army reputation. So the army thought that if they established brothels for soldiers, and soldiers regularly go there, then rape will decrease.
Etsuro Totsuka is a Japanese lawyer who stumbled on the story of the Comfort Women in his work for a member of the Japanese parliament in 1991. At first, he chose to accept the government's position that any brothels set up near the troops had been run by civilian entrepreneurs and pimps. The government at that time flatly denied any military involvement.
The government said they didn't have the information and they didn't know anything.
But did they? Did they have
But
documents?
no, they had many documents inside government offices. And it was very easily found by a historian within one day.
The documents the historian uncovered included military telegrams sent between the army in Taiwan and headquarters in Japan. Human beings treated like so many cases of ammunition. The 50 Aboriginal women serving as comfort women are not enough. There is a need for 20 more.
The more investigation was made, the more close link was established. And now we think that the government, and especially the military, they planned the whole operation.
Government ministers' names show up in documents?
Yes, and yes.
Totsuka was so upset by the government's disclosure, he immediately gave up his regular law practice to devote all of his time to the Comfort Women and their fight for reparations. Soon more victims and more documents appeared. They revealed that the Japanese army didn't just sanction the comfort stations. In many cases, the army dictated every last detail, from weekly medical exams to bedding allotments to the house rules for sex. Condoms required, no kissing allowed. Here in Manila, the regulation of houses of relaxation, as they were called, was so complete that the Japanese army even had a visiting schedule for different units and regulations about how much the women cost. After newspapers published some of this information, the Japanese government had no choice but to change its story. Where once it denied any military involvement, the government now admitted running the brothels, but claimed that the women were all professional prostitutes and volunteers. Just another lie, say the victims like Chung Sung-myung.
None of us chose to go. Who would ever want to go to a place like that to earn money? They trick us by saying if we went to a factory, we would earn lots of money. They drag us there by force.
Koreans like Chong were victimized in the greatest numbers. 80% of the comfort women were Korean. A Japanese man lured Chong from her home with promises of a better life. She ended up on a ship with 400 other girls bound for a brothel in Burma.
The first Japanese guy who came to me was a regimental commander. He took off my clothes and forced himself on me, and when I tried to resist, he got on top of me, took out a knife and said he would stab and kill me.
How many men would come to the room?
20 to 25 men a day, and 30 to 40 men would force themselves on me on Sundays.
We actually abducted women in collaboration with local police using police trucks.
Seiji Yoshida directed a Japanese civil defense unit during the war. Part of his job, making regular trips to Korea to round up fresh, disease-free comfort women. Yoshida estimates he kidnapped 1,000 women for the brothels.
We tried to pick 1 or 2 women from each village, young, healthy women. Criteria is whether they are suitable for comfort women or not.
What would happen then?
As soon as we arrived in the village, the whole village gets in a panic. Women with young children started shaking. I ordered my man to take those children. We forcefully dragged the women into a truck. It is literally slave hunting.
Did it ever occur to you at the time that what you were doing was barbaric or immoral?
If I feel my work is immoral, it could influence the morale of my man. So I made the effort to try to think what I'm doing is for my nation.
The Japanese today have been exposed to the Comfort Women story in the newspaper and on TV. But in downtown Tokyo, few are willing to give you their opinion. Dateline had an equally hard time getting the government to talk. It took us weeks to arrange an interview with Takakatsu Koriyama, Japan's ambassador to the United States, who at the last minute called and canceled. Instead, we were offered Press Secretary Seiichi Kondo.
How did the Japanese military administer the Comfort Women camps?
I don't know.
It was all written out in military codes and ledgers.
Well, I didn't know about that.
Press Secretary Kondo was certain, though, of one thing.
For a long time, the Japanese government said, well, these were prostitutes that went to the battlefront to make some money. Soldiers wanted women, women wanted money. Simple, that's all it was. That was the Japanese argument for a long time.
Our position is that we have not found the evidence of coercion yet.
You haven't found evidence of coercion?
Not yet.
What I can't forget, what is still haunting me, is those faces and eyes of mothers who eventually were taken away from their children. Those eyes, an ultimate fear.
These people want compensation now. They're old women. Their lives were destroyed by Japan.
Yes.
You have women like Gertrude who can't afford the medicine that she needs tomorrow to take care of that spinal pain that she feels from the soldier who kicked her almost 50 years ago. If that soldier survives, he's still getting a pension from the Japanese government. Isn't that true? But the women who are their victims have to wait for a study to be completed?
Yes.
Do you think that's fair?
Yes.
Gertrude. She has found the church where she attended Mass as a young wife. She still had dreams back then of becoming a lawyer, perhaps a judge. But her life after the war crumbled because she'd been a Japanese comfort woman. Her husband left her. He took her children. Now she's alone in the back alleys of Manila.
He told me that he could not bear the thought of my being a comfort woman and having been the leftover of those Japanese officers.
No one knows how many were murdered, how many died on the battlefields. But for the survivors, the rape of the comfort women is unfinished business that will be pursued.
It's all everything, my honor, my very life, my children.
Just this week, the Japanese government grudgingly admitted that its army did force some women into sexual slavery. A statement said, and we quote, "We shall face the historical facts and take them to heart as lessons of history," unquote. But the Japanese turned down all demands of compensation for the comfort women. They said that countries they fought against gave up their claims for compensation when they signed the peace treaty that ended the Second World War.